Alrighty, so we've talked about enlightenment, and now we're going to take a little look at the wonderful world of enlightened despotism, essentially looking to see how the Enlightenment had an impact among the people and rulers, I should say, of Europe. So, our center of enlightened despots. We're told the word despot means that there's an emperor or ruler. This person is going to be a some type of direct ruler, much like a monarch would be considered. That's the way I best describe, this term of despot. And obviously, we talk about, the ruling part of Europe is that most of Europe is being ruled by one of these despots. But despots started becoming a lot more involved with the Enlightenment writers. Obviously, if you're anybody who was anybody at this time in Europe was reading these Enlightenment writers. And we started seeing how the Enlightenment impacts the rulers of the time. We're going to focus on a few of these rulers here. We'll talk about Napoleon later on. We're going to focus more on the first four on our list here, but we're going to see how this definitely changes. Now, different writers had different impacts. So Voltaire is one of the biggest ones who actually lived with Frederick the Great for a while. Remember, a lot of our philosophers believe that government was the best kind of government, was actually a monarchy. So there are very, very few philosophers that felt republic was the way to go. I think Locke and Rousseau are about the only ones that really said, hey, republic, great. But they said monarchy had to be special. Monarchy had to actually respect the rights of the people. You couldn't be a monarch to, serve yourself. You had to be a monarch to serve the people. And that was one of the big issues here. And so one of the things that a lot of these writers wrote about was how do you rule justly? How do you rule correctly? And it's that a lot of these writers ended up corresponding, living with, working with some of the different rulers all around Europe. So, a few of the rulers, we'll talk about a couple of examples how they, use these ideas to kind of better their rule. Now, understand that just because a despot is enlightened doesn't mean they want to share power with anybody. They're still an absolutist monarch, okay? But we're talking about what motivated their changes, okay? They became an enlightened despot, or kind of became more enlightened to, one, make their country stronger, and two, make their own rule more effective. This is a big part here, is that they're using these new ideas to become a better ruler. Now, we're talking about Frederick the Great of Prussia. Frederick the G. Talking a little already in terms of being an absolute monarch, but he's also our number one enlightened monarch as well. So a couple of things about this guy. First off, he did a lot of different reforms, and he was greatly influenced by the writer Voltaire. He started corresponding back and forth with Voltaire, and in fact, Voltaire even came and lived in his court for about 2 years. And remember, Voltaire was big into ideas of toleration. And so we see Frederick the Great being influenced the exact same way in terms of religious freedom and reducing censorship. He definitely pushed these two ideas. So there were a lot less religious restrictions and a lot less censorship restrictions in Prussia as opposed to France and other places. Also, education was a big part. We looked at, the idea of Voltairean education. Frederick the Great kind of pushed for not quite public education, but more public access to education for people and hiring more educated rulers. You also see these changes to the justice system and making things more fair for everybody and getting rid of the use of torture. That being said, while Frederick the Great made changes, it didn't mean that everybody was equal and stuff. He kept serfdom in Prussia. Frederick the Great kept serfdom because he knew that if he took away serfdom, the nobles were going to turn him and he was going to be screwed. So he kind of knew at the same time, he had to balance being enlightened and found Enlightenment values, but he couldn't be all totally 100% all Enlightenment all the time. There are different limits to where a monarch is going to become an enlightened person. Typically enlightened people weren't big fans of serfdom, slavery, etc. Whereas Freddie the G kept the idea of serfdom so that he could keep people in his stead. And obviously, like I said, the biggest look at it is in terms of the Enlightenment is how it changed for the great idea of being king. We've talked so much about Louis XIV, I am the state, that kind of deal. He doesn't call himself I am the state of the state. He calls himself the first servant of the state. So essentially, this idea is that he's not working for himself as a ruler, Instead, he's working for the state. And being this way, Freddie G kept talking about how his goal is to make Prussia a better country. And so when he does the war in Silesia, right, he wants to get those coal fields, make country better. Wants to try and transform Prussia into this more modern state with metallurgy and coal, all that kind of stuff. All these things he does is not to better himself or make himself richer, but to instead make Prussia a better country. We'll look at document again. We've already read it once. We'll look at it one more time. Let's look at Catherine the Great in Russia. So obviously, this is the a little after Peter the Great. Catherine the Great, Tsaress, took over after she actually was really smart, and sure, she had her husband arrested, later confined for being anti-government. But like Peter the Great, she also tried to westernize Russia and started bringing enlightened ideas into the Russian elite. So we saw Peter the Great who tried to force people to, speak French and cut their beards and stuff. Instead, she started to bring Enlightenment writers, Enlightenment documents, that kind of stuff to the Russian elite instead. And obviously, even as some of these monarchs are, Catherine the Great herself wrote plays, wrote prose, all that kind of stuff. Freddie the Great, the exact same thing. He became a writer as well. Like I said, she tried to expose all this Russian elite to these writers and try to inspire them that way versus, forcing them to versus through rules like Peter the Great did. You also had the idea to try to make Russia a more modern country. Instead of being all agriculture all the time, try to become a more modern type place. One thing she did, she actually went and she made a commission. So she said, "Hey, monarch, ruler guys, noble guys, essentially, get together, reform the laws, try to make them better." She was definitely inspired by Montesquieu in terms of how to make a legal code better, how do I improve a country's government. And so, she made us recommendations based off Montesquieu's spirit of laws. One of the biggest things she wanted to change in Russia was religious toleration, Orthodox religion not being the only religion allowed, and getting rid of torture and capital punishment. But the commission didn't allow any of these things to actually go through. In essence, while she was considered to be an enlightened monarch, she didn't really do much for the lives of people. There was essentially a coup attempt in 1773 by the serfs, also tried to uprise against the queen, and she had ended, basically, if you will. So really, she kind of, like Freddie the G, knew that she needed the nobles there, otherwise she was going to lose her throne. And so really, these monarchs are torn between trying to help people and be enlightened and make sure they keep their throne. And so it's a big part of it here. So one thing she did once again was try and make Russia better, was add a lot more land to Russia. And so she fought a lot of wars around the Black Sea, was allowed Russia to gain access to that warm water port. We'll talk in a few minutes here. Also expand Russia westward to Poland and gain more access to the Baltic Sea as well. So she fought a lot of wars trying to make sure she could expand Russia and take over that land. Now, in Austria is our last example. We'll talk about both Maria Theresa and Joseph II. So, let's look at Maria Theresa after the pragmatic sanction, where she looked to try and make sure that she could, she was a big fan of the Enlightenment, a big fan of Enlightenment writers. While strengthening the crown, she also tried to take away all these, different groups that were within Austria. Now, remember, Austria is this big area with different, ethnic groups in it. She's trying to take away some of that autonomy. Each group kind of ran on their own rules, their own laws. And she wanted to try to make government more efficient in terms of making sure everyone had the same rules, same laws, all that kind of stuff. At the same time, though, she was an enlightened person and thought that everyone should have a fair shot at things. And so she actually went to the peasants and reduced the robot. Remember, that's the number of days you had to work for your ruler, for your noble. And so she cut that time down. Obviously, not getting rid of all of it, but cut the time down. Her main concern was military recruits. The idea that nobles are going to work these people to death in their fields, and when she needs an army, they're not going to be available. Because she has to make sure she fights off all these other people who are trying to get a hold of her throne. Her son, Joseph II, takes over in 1765 and actually rules as a co-regent. Okay, he rules with his mother as a co-regent. He's going to make the biggest reforms in all of Europe at this time. Legal reforms, freedom of press, freedom of worship. He's going to let people of Austria essentially have all these freedoms. This is unheard of at this time, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, he's going to change how the justice system works. He's going to change the press, that people can print what they want, petition the government, that people have free worship wherever religion you want to be, even Jewish. Yes, even Jewish. Okay. Biggest thing he did was he actually abolished all of serfdom within Austria. He got rid of the robot, got rid of serfdom, it was gone. And essentially said that if you are working for a noble, they must pay you in cash money. The nobles resisted, okay, essentially, and fought against this the entire time until 1790 when Joseph dies. But this is by far the biggest change that we see in all of Europe at this time. I want you to think about, as you guys read this already, what really changes here. Essentially, the changing between ruler and state. The old idea, as Louis XIV said, I am the state. The state is there to serve the monarch. That's the old kind of 17th century idea. Okay, Charles I, James II had the same issues, right? I'm here, serve me, all that kind of stuff. Whereas the new idea with Freddie the G was that a ruler is a first servant, and a monarch exists to help the state, support the citizen welfare, make the state better. Is why we have a monarch instead of being the state there to serve the monarch is there to serve the state. And so it's a brand new idea in terms of that relationship between the ruler and the country. One example of trying to make your country better is a partition of Poland. Now, Poland was a state that had, some problems, okay? When it comes to Poland, Poland's kind of the redhead stepchild of Europe that everyone kind of beats on it, all right? It had a very weak, very decentralized government. They had a problem, which was called the Liberum Veto. They tried to make things very equal in Poland among the nobles. And if one person disagreed in debate, they canceled the whole session and got rid of all the decisions that have been made. So really, they couldn't make a lot of decisions very quickly, very easily in Poland. Well, Russia, Prussia, Austria, all trying to improve their country, start kind of taking away little different chunks and bits and pieces of Poland. Different methodologies. Some will just invade, take it over. Some will work other ways around it. Depends on your situation. One thing Frederick the Great did was he actually did a money scam. He drove the currency of Poland down, so he essentially had to take over certain sections and gain a bunch of sections of Poland. So you kind of see where Prussia kind of gains its first grouping, okay, with 1772, and different times these two countries will take different chunks of Poland away. Now, one of the big funny stories here is the story of Stanislaus Poniatowski, who was essentially the boyfriend of Catherine the Great. And he's the guy who tried to consolidate power in Poland. He tried to, get power together, try to get all the people to work together and stuff, and essentially fight against, all these people, right? And try to kind of consolidate power and try to get a new constitution signed so that the government can actually be effective. Catherine the Great waltzes in, takes her army to Poland, destroys the constitution, and starts taking, chunks of Poland away again. Eventually, you have a revolution against against all these different places, right? And this is at the serf level. Thaddeus Koshenko did this whole serf revolution in Poland, okay? Catherine and Prussia take their armies into Poland. They divide the rest of it. Essentially, Poland is gone. Honestly, Europe looked at it as being a really good idea that Poland was this backwards kind of holding Europe back, and by taking over and making it better, it's a better thing. We're asked a question in class about who is the most and least enlightened monarch, and if this term is actually an oxymoron or not. We're going to have a big discussion about this in class and some of our goals. Now, one country to talk about it's England, right? England says they're going through this big democratic revolution in terms of being more parliamentarian and focus on parliament, but instead of a king, but it's not really, okay? While we can argue that Britain kind of had this new way of doing things in terms of parliament and having this constitutional monarchy, the middle class nobility were still really fighting over stuff. Middle class being the new rich people in the House of Commons versus the nobility who, willing to give them inherited privilege of nobles to get that money idea. They just want to give it their land. Parliament was obviously the very supreme idea. It's supposed to be this big democratic system. but it wasn't very democratic. They had an idea of boroughs, and you're elected from a borough. And there's a certain piece of land there, but the cheap piece of land did not change with population. And so people kind of were always in office from the same chunks of land until they died, essentially, because it didn't matter where you were. You could have a piece of land that had 3 million people on it, a piece of land that had 15 people on it, and you still get elected. Now, we go through three King Georges in the 1700s in England. George I, George II, George III being the most famous in the end with the U.S. King George III, Hanoverian king again, wanted more power. And so he kind of had this fight again into a parliament to see if he can get more and more power. And he had a group called the King's Friends, led by Lord North. And it was a small faction in parliament that kind of wanted to try and make sure the king could keep some kind of power. Now, the problem is that there was this big policy among the Lord North and the King's Friends, that kind of stuff, of handing out certain jobs and you know, common spots. And people thought this wasn't fair, that some people were getting a special deal. You have the borough mongers who decided who should be in the House of Commons. They kind of chose who was kind of picking, instead of people picking and choosing from the boroughs, who was going to run the bosses, and political people would kind of pick who was going to be the people in the House of Commons. John Wilkes is a famous example of, he argued against these policies and lost his parliament seat. And a lot of people want to try and reform and fix parliaments. They want to try and make a mathematical formula to determine representation, much like we do today in our own Congress. They want to try to have annual parliaments, they have elections more and more often. Edmund Burke kind of said he wanted parliament to be interdependent. Essentially, that there should be no the landowner should rule. There should be no input by the king, by the constituents. Should be the nobles and kind of this middle class group that rule everything. And so you kind of see some things that aren't perfect came here in England as well. But they definitely got more control because they're passing all the laws for new revenue. They're taking over India, expanding their power that way. Even Scotland kind of got screwed here in that. Scotland had to kind of be forced to be in the regular British army. They lost all their traditional kind of ideas, bagpipes and kilts, all those kind of things. Ireland, who had its own kingdom as part of this United Kingdom, right, got pushed out, and Britain literally invaded and took it over and was now ruling it as an imperial parliament from London. And London doesn't believe in Catholics. So there's a big conflict in Ireland about being Catholic and your religion and who's ruling over you and those kind of questions, which where you see a lot of hatred between Britain and Ireland take place. So really, you kind of see a lot of problems happening where you have this kind of this parliament kind of running things almost like an absolute monarch, but as a group of people versus the enlightened monarchs of the rest of Europe. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time. Greatly appreciate it. Make sure you can check this out by Wednesday. I should post it earlier, and I thought I did, but I did, and I apologize for that. Thanks a lot. Bye.